The slap echoed through the grand ballroom like a gunshot. My reading glasses shattered against the marble floor as 100 wedding guests froze mid-celebration. The sting on my cheek was nothing compared to the fire in my chest. Helena, my new daughter-in-law, stood over me in her $15,000 wedding gown, her hand still raised, her fresh wedding ring catching the crystal chandelier light. "Give me those house keys, Margaret, or you'll never see David or Tommy again." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Ice clinked in abandoned champagne glasses. The string quartet's violins hung suspended mid-note. I could feel every pair of eyes boring into me, colleagues from David's tech company, Helena's Boston Society friends, distant relatives who'd flown in for what they thought would be a celebration. I touched my burning cheek, my fingers coming away with blood from where my glasses had cut the skin. The taste of copper filled my mouth. "Helena," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the grandfather clock's steady tick. "Don't Helena me." Her voice was ice cold, each word precisely enunciated. "You promised you'd give me the penthouse keys after the ceremony. Those keys represent control, Margaret, and I'm done waiting." I struggled to my feet, my 68-year-old knees protesting. The beaded navy dress I'd spent 3 months picking out something elegant, but not too attention-grabbing for my son's big day, now felt like a costume for my own humiliation. "Sweetheart, this isn't the time or place." "Now, Margaret." Helena's manicured fingers snapped twice. "The keys. Now." Looking at Helena's triumphant face, my mind drifted back to another moment when David's eyes had filled with tears. 15 years ago, the Harvard acceptance letter had trembled in his 18-year-old hands as he read it for the 3rd time. "Mom, I got in." I actually got in. I'd pulled him into a hug that day, breathing in the smell of his shampoo, memorizing the moment. Behind his shoulder, I could see my wedding ring sitting on the kitchen counter, the last piece of my husband I had left. The sapphire had been his grandmother's, passed down through 3 generations. I'd already called the jewelry store that morning. They'd offered me $12,000. It would cover David's first-year dormitory and meal plan. "You deserve everything good in this world, baby," I whispered into his hair. "Everything." But my sacrifices had started much earlier than Harvard. I remembered those grueling years when David was small, how the alarm clock would scream at 4:30 every morning. I'd roll out of bed, step over 5-year-old David sleeping peacefully in our 1-bedroom apartment, and pull on my cleaning lady uniform. By 5 a.m., I was scrubbing toilets at the downtown office building. By noon, I'd rushed home to change into my waitress outfit for the lunch shift at Mario's Diner. By 7 p.m., after David had eaten his dinner and started his homework, I'd sit at our tiny kitchen table with my bookkeeping clients' receipts spread out like a puzzle I had to solve to keep the lights on. David would look up from his math problems sometimes, his dark eyes so much like his father's worried. "Mommy, why do you only eat noodles?" I'd ruffle his hair and smile, even though my stomach was growling and those instant noodles were all we could afford after paying for his school supplies and new shoes. "Mommy likes noodles, sweetheart. They're my favorite." I'd given him everything good, sold my last precious memory of his father, worked myself to exhaustion for 20 years, and now here I was, bleeding on the floor of his wedding reception while he stood 10 feet away, silent as a statue. Standing in this opulent ballroom, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and marble floors, I couldn't help but think about how this extravagant celebration had come to be. Just 6 months earlier, Helena had spread wedding magazines across my kitchen table like battle plans, and I'd been foolish enough to believe she cared about making David happy. "Mom, you don't have to pay for everything," David had said that evening, but his eyes were already calculating numbers as Helena circled venues with her gold pen. Each circle represented more money than I used to make in 6 months, back when I was working 3 jobs. "The Grand View Ballroom is perfect," Helena had gushed, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulder as she leaned forward. "It's only $30,000 for the reception." Only, the word had hung in the air like incense. The dress is another $15,000. The flowers, catering, photography, music. Helena's pen had kept moving across those glossy pages. We're looking at about $300,000 total. $300,000. My life savings. Money I'd scraped together penny by penny over 40 years of backbreaking work. We could look at something smaller, I had suggested gently. Helena's blue eyes had snapped to mine with laser precision. Mrs. Williams, this is David's wedding. My wedding. Surely you want us to have something memorable? The way she said surely made it sound like only a monster would suggest otherwise. I had written the check that night, watching my account balance drop to nearly zero. But seeing David's face light up when Helena showed him the venue photos made it worth every penny, or so I had thought. Standing here with blood on my lip and shattered glass at my feet, I supposed she'd gotten what she wanted. Looking at Helena now, her face twisted with cruel satisfaction, I could barely reconcile this woman with the person I thought I'd known. My mind wandered back to that evening 2 years ago when she'd been dating my son for 6 months, and I had invited her into my kitchen with such hope in my heart. Helena, let me teach you how to make David's favorite lasagna, I had said, gesturing toward the stove. I was trying so hard to build a relationship with the woman who might become my daughter-in-law. I showed her how to layer the noodles, how to mix the ricotta just right, and how to get the cheese perfectly golden. This is his comfort food, I had explained as we worked side by side. Whenever he was sick as a child, whenever he had a bad day at school, I'd make this for him. He'd sit right there. I pointed to the breakfast nook, and tell me about his day while I cooked. Helena had listened intently, asked all the right questions, even hugged me when we pulled the finished lasagna from the oven. Thank you for sharing this with me, Mrs. Williams. It means so much to know his history, his traditions. I want to be the daughter you never had. She had even cried a little, and I thought my heart might burst with joy. Finally, someone who understood how precious David was, someone who would love him the way he deserved. A year later, I made an even bigger gesture of trust. Helena had been a single mother when she met David, raising her 4-year-old son, Tommy, alone. Watching David embrace the role of stepfather teaching Tommy to ride a bike, reading bedtime stories, being the dad that Tommy had never had, convinced me that Helena truly wanted to build a loving family. This belonged to my grandmother, I had said, placing the sapphire ring in Helena's palm, and my mother. And me. I want you to have it. Helena's eyes were filled with tears. Mrs. Williams, I can't. This is priceless. You're going to be family. You're going to be David's wife, and Tommy will have a real father figure. It belongs with you now. Helena had slipped the ring onto her right hand, where it caught the light like captured starlight. I promise I'll treasure it, she had whispered, and I'll pass it down to Tommy's children someday, with the story of the incredible woman who gave it to me. Now, looking at Helena's hand as she stood over me in her wedding gown, I could see my grandmother's ring glinting on her finger, the ring she'd probably already planned to sell. David. I turned to my son, hoping to see something, anything in his eyes that looked like the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. David Williams, 35 years old, 6 feet tall, wearing a custom tuxedo that cost more than I used to make in 3 months, wouldn't meet my gaze. His hands hung at his sides like dead things. David, please. Mom. His voice cracked slightly. Helena's right. You've been confused lately. The doctor's tests showed early signs of dementia. Maybe it would be better if ... If what? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Helena stepped closer to David, her arm sliding possessively around his waist. If you moved somewhere with proper care, Margaret. Professional care. We've already found a lovely place. Professional care. The euphemism sat between us like a loaded gun. You want to put me in a nursing home? I wasn't asking. We want what's best for you, Helena said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, and what's best for our growing family. Tommy needs stability, and with the new baby coming, our family. Not my family, not the family I'd sacrificed everything to build. And now she was using Tommy Helena's son, whom David had come to love as his own, as another weapon against me. I looked around the ballroom at the guests who were trying to pretend they weren't watching this train wreck unfold. Helena's parents sat at the head table, their Boston Brahmin faces carefully neutral. David's colleagues shifted uncomfortably, some checking their phones, others suddenly fascinated by the ice sculptures. Nobody was going to help me. Nobody was going to stand up and say this was wrong. As I stood there, humiliated and bleeding, my mind drifted to a secret I'd been keeping for over a year. The memory of Dr. Peterson's office was still vivid. The antiseptic smell, the mammogram results spread across his desk like accusations. "Mrs. Williams, I'm afraid I have some difficult news," he had said. "Early-stage breast cancer. Very treatable, especially caught this soon. We'll need to start treatment immediately." I had stared at those films, seeing my own mortality reflected in those ghostly white images. How long do I have? With treatment? Decades, hopefully. The survival rate for early detection is excellent. But Margaret, you'll need support through this. Family. Do you want me to call David? No. The word had come out sharper than I'd intended. David's got enough on his plate with his new relationship. He doesn't need to worry about this. Margaret, promise me, doctor, not a word to anyone. For 8 months, I had undergone chemotherapy, surgery, and radiation, alone, fighting for my life while Helena planned her perfect wedding and David worried about profit margins. I'd even hidden it from Tommy, not wanting to scare the little boy who'd started calling me Grandma Margaret, the first grandmother figure he'd ever known. I'd beaten cancer without anyone knowing because I refused to burden my family or give Helena another weapon to use against me. The confusing incidents that Helena kept mentioning, they hadn't been accidents. About 4 months ago, I had deliberately started my little test. I left the stove on when Helena came to visit, then acted confused when she discovered it. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." I don't remember," I had said, letting my face crumple with confusion and fear. "And yesterday you got lost coming back from the grocery store. David had to come find you," Helena had reminded me, her voice heavy with manufactured concern. That was true too. I had sat in my car for 20 minutes in the grocery store parking lot, deliberately calling David in a panic, pretending I couldn't remember how to get home. "Helena, I'm scared. I think something's wrong with me." Helena's smile had been gentle, understanding, and absolutely predatory. "We've already made an appointment with a specialist. Dr. Reeves, the best in the city. Every confused moment, every forgotten task, every stumble had been carefully orchestrated by me. I'd wanted to see what Helena would do with power over a vulnerable old woman. I'd gotten my answer, and it was worse than I'd imagined. I bent down slowly, my knees protesting, and picked up the largest piece of my shattered glasses. The crystal chandelier light caught the edge, sending tiny rainbows across the marble floor. "You know what, Helena?" I straightened up, my voice steadier than it had been all evening. "You're absolutely right." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction. I am getting older. I forget things sometimes. I dropped the glass shard into my clutch purse, where it clinked against something else, something Helena couldn't see, something brass and small and very important. But there's one thing I will never forget. "What's that?" Helena's voice carried the faintest edge of uncertainty. I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd managed all evening. I never forget who holds the real keys to power. 2 weeks after the wedding, I was sitting in my living room, the penthouse David's father had left me, the one Helena was so determined to claim when I heard the key turn in the lock. They were supposed to be in Tuscany for another week. Helena walked in first, her honeymoon tan glowing above a white sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. David followed behind her, carrying matching designer luggage, his eyes everywhere except on me. "Surprise, Margaret!" Helena's voice was bright as broken glass. "We decided to cut the trip short." All that pasta was making me feel sick. She placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach, and I felt my blood turn to ice water. "You're pregnant." 8 weeks. Helena's smile was triumphant, though I noticed she didn't look any different. "We wanted to tell you in person." "Isn't it wonderful?" David finally looked at me then, and I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Congratulations," I managed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Thank you." Helena settled onto my sofa, my late husband's favorite spot, and kicked off her designer heels. Which reminds me, we need to discuss living arrangements. A pregnant woman needs space, stability, and room to nest. This place is perfect for raising a child. The word "this" hung in the air like a threat. The next morning, I walked into my kitchen to find Helena reorganizing my spice cabinet, humming softly to herself. Every jar I'd collected over decades, carefully labeled, alphabetically arranged, was being tossed into a donation box. "What are you doing?" Helena looked up with that bright, innocent smile. "Spring cleaning." "Well, summer cleaning. These spices are so old, Margaret. Some of them expired in the 1990s. It's not safe for the baby." I watched in horror as she dumped my grandmother's handwritten recipe cards into the trash. "Helena, those recipes are adorable but so outdated. I've already ordered a complete set of organic spices and a meal planning system. Everything will be much more organized now." I opened the cabinet where I used to keep my coffee. Empty. "The coffee's in the pantry now," Helena said, without looking up from her destruction. "I've switched us all to decaf herbal tea. Caffeine isn't good for the baby. Us all." As if this were her house, her kitchen, her life to reorganize. I walked to the pantry and found my coffee shoved behind containers of organic everything and supplements that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When I turned around, Helena was watching me with a small, satisfied smile. "Adjustment period," she said sweetly. "We'll all get used to the new normal." The bills started arriving a week later, each one a small dagger to my independence. "Mrs. Williams," the utility company representative said over the phone, "your account is 60 days past due. If we don't receive payment by Friday, we'll have to disconnect service." I stared at the stack of unopened mail Helena had been helping me organize. Apparently, her version of organization meant I never saw anything important. There must be some mistake. I set up automatic payments years ago. Those were canceled last month. "We show a request came in from your authorized representative, Mrs. Helena Williams. She explained about your memory issues and said she'd be taking over your finances." My hands started shaking. Memory issues. The fake dementia diagnosis she'd orchestrated. "I never authorized." "The request came with proper medical documentation, ma'am. Dr. Reeves confirmed your cognitive decline and recommended family oversight." I hung up and immediately called my bank, my heart pounding. "Mrs. Williams, your checking account shows some unusual activity," the banker said carefully. "Large transfers to an account we don't recognize. Would you like me to walk you through the transactions? $20,000? $50,000. $75,000. All transferred to Williams Family Trust, an account I'd never opened, never authorized, never even heard of. "Mrs. Williams? Are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm still here." But I was beginning to understand that Helena intended to make sure I wouldn't be for much longer. "Grandma Margaret!" 4-year-old Tommy barreled into my arms like a small missile, his gap-toothed grin lighting up my entire world. This was Helena's son from her previous relationship, the child David had embraced as his own from the moment they started dating. I'd watched their bond grow over 2 years, and Tommy had become the child David never had and the closest thing to a grandchild I'd ever have. Guess what? Mommy said we might move to a bigger house soon, with a big yard and a swimming pool. My blood chilled as I held him tighter. Did she now? Helena appeared in the doorway, her hand resting on her stomach in that protective gesture she'd perfected. Tommy, why don't you go play in the living room? Grandma Margaret and I need to have a grown-up talk. Tommy hugged me once more and scampered off, leaving Helena and me alone in the hallway. He's excited about the move, Helena said casually, examining her manicured nails. What move? Well, this place is going to be so much better for raising children than that cramped apartment David insists on keeping. Tommy needs a yard to play in, don't you think? And when the new baby comes. I felt the walls closing in around me. This is my home, Helena. It was your home. But you're not well enough to maintain a place this size anymore. Are you? She said it like she was asking about the weather, her voice light and conversational. Helena, I've lived here for 40 years. My husband died in that bedroom. David took his first steps in that living room. This house is just a house. Helena's voice was gentle, understanding and cruel. And houses are for the living, Margaret. For people who can take care of them properly. Dr. Reeves had kind eyes and gentle hands, and when he finished his examination, he sat back in his chair with a puzzled expression. Mrs. Williams, I have to say, your cognitive function tests are remarkably good for someone your age. Your memory, problem-solving abilities, everything is well above average. I felt a surge of vindication wash over me. So there's nothing wrong with me? From a medical standpoint? Number. Your daughter-in-law mentioned some incidents getting lost, forgetting things, but honestly, those could happen to anyone under stress. Are you under stress, Mrs. Williams? I glanced at Helena, who was sitting in the corner chair, her face a mask of concerned innocence. Some, I admitted carefully. Dr. Reeves made a note in my file. I'd like to see you again in 6 months just to be safe. But I see no reason you can't continue living independently. Outside the doctor's office, Helena was quiet as we walked to the car. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Well, I said finally, that's good news, isn't it? Helena stopped walking. When she turned to look at me, her mask had slipped completely for just a moment. One doctor's opinion, she said coldly. We'll get a second opinion. And a third, if necessary. Money talks, Margaret, and I have access to plenty of yours now. I stood outside Tommy's preschool, watching through the chain-link fence as he played on the swings. This had become my routine, the only way I could see him since Helena had decided my condition made me an unsuitable babysitter. Grandma Margaret! He'd spotted me and was running toward the fence, his face bright with joy. Tommy, no! Helena's voice cut across the playground like a whip. She was hurrying toward us, her heels clicking on the asphalt, her face a mask of concern. Mrs. Williams, what are you doing here? I just wanted to see him. Tommy, come here right now. Helena's voice was sharp. Grandma Margaret she's not feeling well today. Remember what we talked about? About how sometimes grandparents get sick in their minds? But I want to talk to Grandma. Now, Tommy. The teachers are worried about strangers hanging around the school. Strangers. She'd called me a stranger to Tommy, the boy I'd watched grow from a shy 4-year-old into a confident child under David's loving care. I watched Tommy's face crumble with confusion as Helena led him away. He kept looking back at me over his shoulder, and I pressed my hand against the fence, wishing I could reach through and pull him back to safety. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the room I'd shared with my husband for 35 years, where I'd held David as a newborn, where I'd cried myself to sleep after the funeral, where I'd fought cancer in secret and made a decision. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out a small brass key that Helena had never seen, never even suspected existed. The safe deposit box had been my secret for 20 years. Even David didn't know about it. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. James Morrison speaking. James, it's Margaret Williams. There was a pause. Margaret? It's 11 o'clock at night. Is everything all right? James Morrison had been my husband's business partner, my lawyer, and one of my oldest friends. More importantly, he was one of the few people who knew the truth about Williams Technologies' ownership structure. James, I need to ask you about that contingency plan we discussed after Robert died. The one you said I should hope I'd never need. Another pause, longer this time. Margaret, what's happened? Everything, I said quietly. Helena's moving faster than we anticipated. The next tech deal, the nursing home, everything. And James, I think it's time to remind my family who really hold the keys to this kingdom. I found the brochures on my kitchen counter the next morning, spread out like tarot cards predicting my future. Sunset Manor, where care meets comfort. Golden Years Assisted Living, your new beginning. Peaceful Meadows Memory Care, specialized support for cognitive decline. Helena walked into the kitchen as I was reading, her silk robe rustling softly. She moved like a woman who already owned everything in sight. I've been doing research, she said, pouring herself a glass of organic orange juice. These are the best facilities in the state. I've already called to schedule tours for this weekend. Tours. The word felt like lead on my tongue. David thinks we should move quickly. The best places have waiting lists, and with your condition deteriorating, I set down the brochure for Peaceful Meadows. The cover showed an elderly woman smiling vacantly, while a nurse helped her with a jigsaw puzzle. The woman's eyes were empty, unfocused, dead. What about my house? Well, it'll need some updates before we can move in properly. New furniture, fresh paint, maybe knock out that wall between the kitchen and dining room. I've already contacted a contractor. She was already planning to tear down the walls of my life. Helena, what if I don't want to go? She paused with the orange juice halfway to her lips. When she looked at me, her eyes were as cold as the winter sky. Margaret, you don't really have a choice anymore, do you? The words hung between us like a death sentence. The meeting at the bank was a masterclass in public humiliation. Helena had insisted on bringing David, and the three of us sat across from Mr. Patterson, the bank manager, in his sterile office that smelled like furniture polish and broken dreams. Mrs. Williams, Patterson said, his voice carefully professional, your son and daughter-in-law have provided medical documentation indicating you're no longer capable of managing your own affairs. I looked at the papers spread across his desk. Official letterhead. Dr. Reeves's signature. Only the recommendations were completely different from what Dr. Reeves had actually told me. This isn't what my doctor recommended. Ma'am, I have his written assessment right here. It clearly states that you're experiencing significant cognitive decline and recommends immediate financial oversight for your own protection. David sat beside Helena, his hands folded in his lap, still not meeting my eyes. When did my strong, confident son become this hollow-eyed stranger? David, you know this isn't true. Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Mom, we're just trying to protect you and your assets from mistakes. What mistakes? Helena leaned forward, her voice gentle, understanding. The unpaid bills, Margaret. The confusion about your accounts. The time you tried to wire $10,000 to that phone scammer who said he was Tommy, calling from jail. I stared at her. It's okay, Helena continued, her hand briefly touching mine in a gesture of false comfort. These things happen as we age. That's why David and I are here, to take care of everything. The banker slid a stack of papers across the desk. If you'll just sign here, Mrs. Williams, we can transfer account management to your son and ensure all your bills are paid on time. Really, it's for your own good. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. Around me, I could feel the walls closing in, cutting off my air, my freedom, my life. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I remembered signing David's first bank account when he turned 16, teaching him about responsibility and saving. "Money is freedom, sweetheart," I had told him. "Never let anyone take your financial independence away." Now he was sitting beside the woman who was taking mine. I signed my name, each letter feeling like a small death. 3 days after signing away my financial freedom, I was folding laundry in my bedroom when I heard Helena on the phone in the hallway. Her voice carried that particular tone she used when she thought no one was listening. Sharp, calculating, real. "No, the pregnancy test was negative again," she was saying, "but I can fake it for another few months, long enough to get the old bat settled in the nursing home and the house transferred." I froze, a pillowcase half folded in my hands. David's so desperate to be a father, he believes everything I tell him. And the pregnancy gives me the perfect excuse for needing space, needing the house. There was a pause. Then Helena laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Trust me, by Christmas, Margaret Williams will be drooling in a wheelchair somewhere and will own everything. Then I can have that convenient miscarriage, and we can both disappear with the money." Disappear. She was planning to leave David with nothing. I carefully set down the pillowcase and tiptoed to my bedroom door. Through the crack, I could see Helena pacing the hallway, one hand on her flat stomach, the other holding her phone. And the best part? When we disappear, we're taking Tommy too. David will lose his wife, his money, and the kid he's grown so attached to. He'll be completely destroyed. Tommy. She was talking about ripping Tommy away from the only father he'd ever known. My heart shattered and reformed itself into something harder, colder. Helena wasn't just planning to steal my life. She was planning to destroy David's too. Helena called it a celebration of memories. I called it a wake for the living. They'd invited everyone. David's colleagues, Helena's friends, neighbors I'd known for decades. They gathered in my living room, drinking wine that cost more than some people's weekly grocery budget and eating catered hors d'oeuvres, while Helena regaled them with stories of my decline. "It's been so hard watching her struggle," Helena said, her voice heavy with manufactured grief. She stood by the fireplace, one hand on her stomach, the picture of a caring daughter-in-law. "But we're grateful we found such a lovely place for her." Sunset Manor has specialized programs for people with dementia. Dementia? The word fell into the room like a stone into still water, creating ripples of pity and uncomfortable sympathy. Mrs. Henderson from next door patted my hand sympathetically. "You're so lucky to have such caring children, Margaret." Lucky. I nodded and smiled and let everyone tell me how lucky I was. "Speech," someone called out. "Margaret should say something." The room fell quiet. 25 faces turned toward me, expectant, kind, utterly oblivious to what was really happening. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. Or maybe that was just the weight of 40 years of memories pressing down on me. "I want to thank you all for coming," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "for celebrating with us tonight." Helena beamed at me from across the room, her smile so bright it could have powered the city. "You know, I've lived in this house for 40 years. I brought my baby boy home from the hospital to this house. I nursed my husband through his final illness in these rooms. I've loved and lost and rebuilt my life here more times than I can count." I could see Helena's smile beginning to falter. "And tomorrow I'll leave it all behind. Because my family..." I looked directly at David. "My family knows what's best for me." The silence was deafening. Ice clinked in glasses. Someone coughed uncomfortably. "Of course," I continued, "there are some things you can't leave behind. Some things that follow you wherever you go." Helena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Memories, for instance, and secrets, and the truth about who people really are." I smiled at Helena, and for just a moment I let her see past the confused old woman act. The truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it? even when we think we've buried it deep. The party ended early. People made excuses about early mornings and prior commitments, but really they just wanted to escape the suffocating atmosphere of grief and endings. As the last guest left, Helena kicked off her heels and collapsed dramatically onto my sofa. "Well, that was awkward," she said. "Margaret, you almost made it sound like we're forcing you out." "Aren't you?" Helena laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Forcing you. We're saving you from yourself, from making a bigger fool of yourself than you already have." David was gathering empty wine glasses, his movements mechanical, avoiding the conversation entirely. "David," I said, "please, look at me." He stopped moving but didn't turn around. "This house, it's all I have left of your father, of our life together, of your childhood. Please don't make me leave." Finally, David turned. His eyes were glassy. Whether from wine or unshed tears, I couldn't tell. "Mom, you can't stay here alone anymore." "What if something happens? What if you fall or forget to take your medication or—" "I won't. I'll be more careful. I'll get help if I need it. Please, David, please." I felt my knees buckle, and suddenly I was on the floor, my hands grabbing at Helena's silk dress, my pride scattered like my shattered glasses had been at the wedding. "Please," I whispered, "don't do this to me. I'm begging you." Helena looked down at me with something that might have been pity if it weren't so cold, so satisfied. "Get up, Margaret. You're embarrassing yourself." When I didn't move, when I stayed there on my knees like a penitent in church. Helena stepped back, shaking her dress free from my grip. "David, help your mother to her room. She's obviously overwrought." David's hands were gentle as he helped me to my feet, but his voice was firm. "Come on, Mom. Let's get you settled." As he led me toward the stairs, Helena called after us. "The movers come at 8 a.m. sharp, Margaret. I suggest you get some rest. It's going to be a long day." Sarah Johnson had worked for me for 15 years. She'd cleaned this house, cooked meals when I was too tired, listened to me worry about David through his awkward teenage years and messy early relationships. She was more than an employee, she was family in every way that mattered. Now she stood in my bedroom, tears streaming down her face, helping me pack a lifetime into 3 suitcases. "Mrs. Williams, this isn't right," she whispered as she folded my clothes with shaking hands. "That woman, she's evil," I finished for her. "Yes, I know. Can't you fight this? Get a lawyer? There has to be something." I smiled sadly, picking up the framed photo from my nightstand David's college graduation, the two of us grinning in our caps and gowns. I'd been so proud that day, so full of hope for his future. "Sarah, she's gotten to everyone, the doctors, the bank, even David. Who's going to believe a confused old woman over a pregnant young wife?" Sarah picked up my jewelry box, her movements careful, reverent. "What about all your beautiful things? Your mother's china? Your wedding dress?" "Material things," I said, though my heart was breaking. "They're just material things." But as Sarah wrapped my grandmother's silver tea set in tissue paper, I opened my jewelry box and pulled out a small brass key. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me." She looked up, her eyes bright with hope and tears. "Next Friday, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I need you to go to the basement. Behind the water heater, there's a small safe built into the wall. This key opens it." I pressed the key into her palm, my fingers closing over hers. "Inside, you'll find some papers. Very important papers. When you find them, call this number." I handed her a business card. "Ask for James Morrison. Tell him Margaret says it's time." Sarah stared at the key like it was made of diamonds. "Time for what?" I smiled, the first real smile I'd managed in months. Time for Helena to learn that some keys opened doors she never knew existed. I spent my last night in the house walking through empty rooms, touching walls that held 40 years of memories. In the kitchen, I could almost smell the birthday cakes I'd baked here. In the living room, I could hear the echo of Christmas mornings and David's laughter. In the bedroom I'd shared with Robert, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the drawer of my nightstand one last time. Inside was a letter I'd written years ago and never sent. A letter to David, explaining everything about the company, about my sacrifices, about how much I loved him. I sealed it in an envelope and wrote his name on the front. Tomorrow, Helena would get what she thought she wanted. But sometimes, when you think you've won everything, you discover you've actually lost what matters most. And sometimes, the person you think is powerless has been holding all the real power all along. Sunset Manor smelled like institutional food and lost hope, with undertones of disinfectant that couldn't quite mask the scent of human despair. My room was 8 feet by 10 feet, with a narrow bed, a plastic chair, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot where families dropped off their inconvenient elderly. "Isn't this nice?" Helena said, setting my one-allowed suitcase on the bed. "So cozy. And the staff seems very attentive." The attentive staff member was a tired-looking woman named Brenda, who spoke to me like I was 6 years old and potentially dangerous. "Now, Mrs. Williams, dinner is at 5:30 sharp, no exceptions, and lights out at 9 p.m. We find routine is very important for our residents with memory issues." Residents, not people, not individuals with histories and families and decades of experience. Residents with memory issues. "Can I have a phone in my room?" I asked. Brenda exchanged a look with Helena. "Well, that depends. Family members sometimes prefer to monitor communications, to prevent confusion and inappropriate calls." Helena nodded thoughtfully. "I think that might be best. Margaret gets agitated when she talks to too many people. It's not good for the baby's stress levels for me to worry about her." And just like that, I was cut off from the outside world. "Don't worry, Mom," David said, though his voice sounded hollow like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "We'll visit every week. And you can call us if you need anything." Call them how, exactly, without a phone? But I just smiled and nodded, the picture of a confused old woman accepting her fate. "Of course, dear," I said softly. "I understand." But what I understood was that Helena had underestimated me. She thought she'd locked away a helpless old woman. What she'd actually done was give me the perfect cover for what came next. 3 days later, Sarah called me at Sunset Manor during the 1 hour per week I was allowed phone calls. "Mrs. Williams," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I found the safe. I found everything." My heart started racing. "Tell me." "The documents, they say you own 60% of Williams Technology, not David, you, and there's something about a Nextech deal worth billions. 2.7 billion. Nextech was one of the biggest technology companies in the world, the kind of deal that would make headlines everywhere. So that's what this was all about. What else did you find, Sarah?" "Bank statements, investment accounts I never knew existed. Mrs. Williams, if Helena gets control of David's finances..." "She'll steal everything," I finished. "Sarah, did you call James Morrison like I asked?" "Yes, ma'am. He said to tell you the board meeting is Monday, and we need to move fast." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Tell him it's time. Later that evening, James Morrison managed to get through to me on the facility's emergency line. "Margaret, Sarah brought me the documents. This is bigger than we thought." "How big?" "David's been negotiating to sell the majority stake of Williams Technology to Nextech Corporation. He thinks he has the authority, but he doesn't," I finished, "because I own 60%. "Exactly. Margaret, if this sale goes through and Helena gets control of David's finances, she'll disappear with everything." I thought about the conversation I'd overheard, Helena's plan to fake a miscarriage and vanish with her real husband and Tommy. The board meeting is scheduled for Monday. We need to move fast. I looked around the depressing common room of Sunset Manor, at the residents staring blankly at a television playing old game shows. "James, get me out of here. It's time to remind my family who really owns this company." My first week at Sunset Manor, I learned the routine and played along perfectly. Wake at 6 a.m., breakfast at 7, medications at 8, activities at 9, which consisted of staring at a television playing old movies while drooling residents dozed in wheelchairs. I was sitting in the common room pretending to watch The Price is Right when Brenda appeared at my elbow. "Mrs. Williams, you have a phone call, emergency family business." My heart started racing, but I kept my face blank and confused. "Phone call?" But I thought, "It's your lawyer, dear. Something about paperwork you need to sign." I shuffled to the nurse's station, playing the part of the bewildered old woman, and picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Hello?" "Margaret, it's James." I glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then hunched over the phone. "James, did Sarah ? She did. And Margaret, we need to talk. Can you get away from there for a few hours?" "Get away?" "James, I'm in a locked facility. They monitor everything." "Not everything," James said quietly. "Tell them you have a doctor's appointment. Emergency consultation for your heart condition. I'll send a car and a nurse to escort you. They can't legally prevent you from seeking medical care." My heart condition. The one I'd never mentioned to anyone here. "James, you brilliant man." "Save the compliments, Margaret. We have a war to win." James Morrison's office felt like stepping back into the real world. He poured me tea in real china cups and sat across from me like I was a human being instead of a problem to be managed. "Margaret, remind me why you never told David about the company ownership." I sipped my tea, feeling almost normal for the first time in weeks. Robert and I agreed. We wanted David to earn his position, not inherit it. We thought if he knew he owned 20% outright and would inherit my 60% eventually, he might not work as hard to prove himself. Exactly. We wanted him to become the kind of man who deserved to run a company, not just the kind of man who inherited one. Robert built that company with my investment money, but we let David think it was his father's life insurance that funded it. James nodded, and Helena doesn't know. Nobody knows except you, me, and the board of directors. David thinks he founded the company with money from his father's life insurance policy, when actually, his father founded it with my investment money from the cleaning business I built after Robert died. That little company I started with 3 clients and a bucket has grown into a $50 million enterprise. And Williams Technology? That's my baby, too. James spread several documents across his desk. "Margaret, I have some interesting news. Williams Technology has been in acquisition talks with Nextech Corporation for the past 6 months. My blood went cold. Acquisition talks? David's been representing the company as its primary owner. He's been negotiating to sell 60% of the company to Nextech Corporation, one of the biggest technology companies in the world, for..." James consulted his notes. $2.7 billion. The room started spinning. $2.7 billion? With a B. The deal is supposed to close next Monday. Next Monday. 4 days from now. I thought about Helena's sudden pregnancy announcement, her rush to get me out of the house, her urgency about gaining access to my accounts and property. "She knows," I whispered. "She knows what?" "About the sale. Maybe not about my ownership, but she definitely knows about the Nextech deal. That's why she's moving so fast. She wants everything locked down before the money changes hands. She's planning to disappear with David's share and leave him with nothing." James leaned back in his chair. "Margaret, what do you want to do?" I thought about Helena slapping me at the wedding, about David standing silent while I begged, about Tommy being kept away from me, about the plastic chair and institutional food and being told when I could brush my teeth. But mostly, I thought about the conversation I'd overheard, about Helena planning to fake a miscarriage and disappear, about Tommy not being David's son, about my boy losing everything he'd worked for to a woman who'd never loved him. "I want to stop the sale," I said quietly. "That will destroy the deal David's been working on for months." No, I corrected. It will save my son from the biggest mistake of his life. The Williams Technology boardroom was all glass and steel and modern art that cost more than most people's houses. I hadn't been here in 5 years, not since Robert's memorial service. But I was still on the board. I was still the majority shareholder, and I could still call an emergency meeting. The board members filed in looking confused and concerned. These were people who'd known me for decades, who'd watched David grow up, who'd respected Robert's wishes about keeping our family's ownership quiet. "Margaret," said Patricia Davis, the board chairman, "we weren't expecting to see you today. David said you were unwell." "I'm fine, Patricia." "Better than fine, actually. I'm here to discuss the Nextech acquisition." The room went very quiet. "Margaret," said Michael Thompson, "that deal was negotiated by David as the company's primary owner. We weren't aware you wanted to be involved. I wasn't aware David was negotiating to sell my company without my permission." I placed the folder on the conference table and opened it. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think there's been some confusion about ownership structure." For the next hour, I walked them through every document, every percentage, every legal detail that proved what they'd always known but had chosen to forget. I owned Williams Technology. David didn't. "So," Patricia said when I finished, "any sale of the company requires your explicit written consent, which I am not going to give." "Margaret," said Thomas Anderson, "this is a $2.7 billion deal. David's worked years to make this happen, and Helena's worked months to steal it from him." I pulled out one more document. This is a recording of a conversation between Helena and an unknown male accomplice discussing their plan to defraud David and disappear with the money. She's not pregnant, gentlemen. She's not even legally married to my son, and she's planning to destroy him. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. "What do you want us to do, Margaret?" Patricia asked quietly. I smiled. "I want you to call an emergency meeting for Monday morning. All shareholders required to attend. Tell David there are complications with the Nextech deal that require immediate attention." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that happens when someone tries to sell something that belongs to someone else." I spent Sunday night in a downtown hotel, ordering room service and taking a hot bath without anyone telling me when lights out was. In the morning, I put on my best Navy suit, the one I'd worn to board meetings back when Robert was alive and had James pick me up in his car. "You ready for this, Margaret?" "I've been ready for 40 years. Williams Technology Incorporated occupied floors 35 through 40 of the Premier Building. As we rode the elevator up, I felt like I was ascending to my own coronation. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened onto the familiar reception area. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked confused as James and I approached. "I'm sorry, but the emergency board meeting is private." "I'm Margaret Williams," I said calmly. "This is my company." The boardroom had glass walls so I could see David and Helena inside, both leaning over a stack of papers. Helena was gesturing animatedly, her hands moving as she spoke. David nodded along, the dutiful husband, while Helena wore a black maternity dress that emphasized her still flat stomach. They hadn't seen me yet. I opened the door and walked in. "Good morning, David." "Helena." David's head snapped up like he'd been electrocuted. "Mom, what are you... How did you get here? Aren't you supposed to be at Sunset Manor?" "I checked myself out," I said simply. "Temporary medical leave." "I'm feeling much better now." Helena recovered first, her face arranging itself into an expression of concern. "Margaret, sweetheart, you look confused. This is a very stressful business meeting. Why don't I call Brenda to come pick you up?" "Because," I said, settling into the chair at the head of the conference table. "My chair, the one I'd inherited when Robert died. This is my meeting." The board members began filing in. Patricia Davis, Michael Thompson, Susan Walsh, Thomas Anderson. People who'd known me for decades, who'd watched David grow up at company barbecues and Christmas parties. David looked around the room, confusion written across his face. I don't understand. What meeting? Patricia, you said there were complications with the Next-Tech deal. There are, Patricia said quietly, quite significant ones. Helena's eyes were darting between faces, her politician's instincts sensing danger. What kind of complications? She asked, her voice tight. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the manila folder Sarah had retrieved from my safe. The kind that happens when someone tries to sell something that doesn't belong to them. David, I said gently, do you remember when you started Williams Technology? Do you remember where the startup money came from? Dad's life insurance policy, $200,000. And do you remember what that money bought? David's brow furrowed. 20% of the company. I had to find other investors for the rest. And who were those other investors? Anonymous partners. You and Dad said it was better if I didn't know, so I could focus on building the business instead of managing relationships. I slid the shareholder agreement across the table. David, meet your anonymous partner. He picked up the document and read it. His face went white. Mom, this says you own 60% of the company. That's right. Helena grabbed the paper from his hands, her eyes scanning the legal language. This is fake. This has to be fake. It's not fake, Patricia Davis said quietly. Margaret has been the majority shareholder since the company's founding. The board has always known. David stared at me like I was a stranger. Why didn't you tell me? Because your father and I wanted you to earn your position. We wanted you to become the kind of man who deserved to run a company, not just inherit one. David's been negotiating this sale for months. I've been telling Next-Tech I have authority to... You don't, I said simply. Any sale of this company requires my written consent, which brings us to why we're here. James Morrison stood and connected his laptop to the conference room's large display screen. A video began playing. It was Helena, sitting in a coffee shop talking to a man I didn't recognize. The old bat should be out of the picture by Christmas, Helena's recorded voice said. Once she's in the nursing home and David has power of attorney, we can liquidate everything. The house alone is worth $3 million. The man across from her nodded. And the company sale? $2.7 billion. David doesn't know about my connection to the Next-Tech negotiations, but I've been feeding them inside information for months. Once the deal closes, I'll have him invest everything in my father's real estate company. Then when that conveniently goes bankrupt... Helena was staring at the screen in horror. Where did you get this? Private investigators are wonderful things, James said calmly, especially when they're former FBI agents. The video continued. What about Tommy? The man asked. What about him? David thinks he's going to be Tommy's real father forever. But once I disappear with you and the kid, he'll realize what a fool he's been. Men are so stupid when you make them feel needed. Tommy. She was talking about taking Tommy away from David forever. David had gone completely white. He was staring at the screen like it was showing him his own death. And the baby you're carrying now? The man asked. Helena laughed again. What baby? I'm not pregnant, you idiot. That's just pillow stuffing and acting. David's been wanting to be a father so badly he's 35 and never had kids. He believes everything I tell him about the pregnancy because he's so desperate for a family. You're not pregnant, David said. It wasn't a question. Of course I'm not pregnant, you pathetic fool. Helena's mask had finally slipped completely. Gone was the sweet, concerned daughter-in-law. What remained was cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. Do you have any idea how much money is at stake here? I wasn't about to risk my body for some fake pregnancy storyline. David turned to me, his eyes desperate, broken. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never suspected. I know, baby, I said gently. She's very good at what she does. Helena stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward and hitting the wall. This is all very touching, but none of it matters. I'm still David's legal wife. I still have access to his accounts. And Margaret is still a senile old woman who belongs in a nursing home. Actually, James said, pulling out another document, there are a few more things you should know. He slid the paper across the table. Helena Morrison, or should I say Helena Blackwood, is already married. To him, he pointed to the man in the video. Her marriage to David is invalid. Bigamy is a federal crime. Helena's face was a mask of fury now. You can't prove any of this. We don't have to, I said quietly. You just confess to everything on camera. I gestured to the small device James had placed on the conference table when we walked in. That little recorder has been running since I sat down. The police arrived within minutes. Apparently, James had called them before the meeting started. As they handcuffed Helena, she turned to David one last time. You really think you can go back to being Mommy's little boy? You really think she'll forgive you for choosing me over her? David looked at me, his face full of shame and regret and something that looked like hope. I know she will, he said quietly, because that's the kind of person she is. The kind of person I forgot how to be. As they led Helena away, she called back over her shoulder, You'll regret this, Margaret. All of you will regret this. The conference room fell silent except for the sound of David crying. David, I said gently, look at me. He raised his head, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I let her turn me against you. I stood by while she hurt you. I put you in that place. I said stop firmly. I got up from my chair and walked around the table to where he was sitting. Then I did what I'd been wanting to do for months. I hugged my son. You're forgiven, I whispered into his hair. You're my baby boy and you're forgiven. He sobbed against my shoulder like he was 5 years old again. How can you forgive me so easily? Because that's what mothers do, I said. We love our children even when they make terrible mistakes, even when they break our hearts, even when they forget who they are for a while. I pulled back and looked at him. But David, you have to earn back my trust. And more importantly, you have to earn back your own self-respect. He nodded. Tell me how. You start by being the man your father and I raised you to be. The man I know you still are, underneath all this mess. 6 months later, I was back in my penthouse, having breakfast in my own kitchen with my grandson. Grandma Margaret, can you teach me to make pancakes like you taught Daddy? Of course, sweetheart. Tommy was living with me now, while David worked with social services and lawyers to establish permanent custody. Helena had tried to take Tommy when she was arrested, claiming her rights as the biological mother, but the boy had clung to David, crying, I want to stay with Daddy. David was the only real father Tommy had ever known, and I was the grandmother figure he'd grown to love. Love, I'd learned, wasn't always about biology. David knocked on the kitchen door and walked in, carrying flowers and looking more like the son I remembered. Morning, Mom. Morning, buddy. Daddy! Tommy launched himself into David's arms. These are for you, David said, handing me the daisies. Just because. Just because. When was the last time someone had given me flowers just because? What's on your agenda today? I asked. Board meeting at 10. The Nextech deal is officially dead, but we've got 3 other companies interested in partnerships instead of acquisitions. Partnerships that will let us maintain control. Us? David smiled. Well, you're the majority shareholder. I figure it's time I started asking your opinion on things. It was a start. A good start. On Tommy's 5th birthday, we had a party in my penthouse. Not a formal affair with catered food and society guests, but a real party with homemade cake and pin the tail on the donkey and children laughing. David was there, of course, and Sarah, who'd become like a daughter to me, and James Morrison, who'd brought his grandson to play with Tommy, and neighbors and friends, and all the people who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. As I watched Tommy blow out his candles, surrounded by people who loved him, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The humiliation at the wedding felt like something that had happened to someone else. The nights in Sunset Manor, the fear, the desperation, all of it had led to this moment. Tommy made his wish and blew out the candles in one breath. Everyone cheered. "What did you wish for, buddy?" David asked. Tommy looked around the room at all the faces smiling at him. "I wished for us to always be together," he said simply. I felt tears spring to my eyes. "That's a very good wish," I told him. Later, after the guests had gone home and Tommy was asleep in his bed, David and I sat on the balcony overlooking the city. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you think Dad would be proud of how things turned out?" I thought about Robert, my husband, David's father, the man who'd built a company on the principle that family came first, always. "I think," I said, "he'd be proud that we found our way back to each other." David nodded and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below us. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed. Sometimes justice looks like a family dinner around your own table, with your son and grandson laughing at your terrible jokes. Sometimes catharsis is as simple as realizing that you're exactly where you belong. 5 years have passed since that terrible wedding day. Helena was released from federal prison after serving 3 years and now works at a women's shelter in another state, helping other women who've made bad choices find better paths. I like to think prison changed her, though I'll never know for sure. David runs Williams Technology with wisdom and integrity, the way his father would have wanted. The company never sold to Nextech, but it went public instead, and the IPO made us all wealthy beyond our wildest dreams. But more importantly, it made David into the leader I always knew he could be. Tommy is 9 now, and he calls me Grandma and David Dad without any confusion about biology or legality, or any of the complicated adult concepts that once threatened to tear our family apart. Last week, he brought home a drawing from school. It was our family stick figures holding hands in front of a house. At the bottom, in his careful 3rd grade handwriting, he'd written, "My family is perfect." Not because we haven't made mistakes, not because we haven't hurt each other, but because we've learned that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being forgiven and forgiving and choosing each other every day no matter what. Helena taught me that I was stronger than I knew. David taught me that love can survive betrayal. Tommy taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. And I taught them all that sometimes. The most powerful thing an old woman can do is refuse to disappear quietly. The keys to real power aren't made of brass or steel. They're made of love and determination and the refusal to let anyone take away what matters most. If you enjoyed this story of family, betrayal, and redemption, I hope you'll share it with others who might need to hear that it's never too late to fight for what matters most. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge, it's simply surviving long enough to see love win. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. Remember, you're stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and more loved than you realize.